So this evening, I want to really expand on what we've learned and really start a bit of a panel discussion. We have three distinguished panelists, not just talking on an information, but how do we fundamentally tackle this challenge on a grassroots level. So first is Rabbi Seth Grauer. He's the head of school and the Rosh Yeshiva for Bnei Akiva Schools of Toronto, the largest modern Orthodox day school program in the city, so welcome. We also have Dr. Professor Jack Muskat. I don't know if you have any other titles, but Professor Jack Muskat, most importantly, is the chair of Husband Fellowships Canada. But Professor Muskat has his doctorate in behavioral psychology and is also a professor at the Schulich School of Business at York University. And so thank you, Jack, for joining us as well. And last but certainly not least, Aviva Polonsky. I don't know, many of you maybe haven't heard of Aviva. She tends to keep to herself, tends not to share her opinions. But Aviva Polonsky is a well-known Jewish teacher and educator at the Community Hebrew Academy of Toronto. She's also the president of the Federation of Jewish Teachers of Toronto, and not just as a teacher every day, but really as a leader in her community. She recently brought a group of students to APAC. You may have heard about that. And she is really instrumental in engaging students, not just to learn, but to step up his leadership role. So thank you, Aviva, for joining as well. And of course, Rabbi Blech will be joining on the panel, and you've already heard a little bit about him. So we're going to remove the lectern, and then we'll, in about 30 seconds, begin a panel discussion. I'm going to ask our panelists to limit their responses to 2.5 minutes. We have a lot of content I want to get through. So first, I want to start with Aviva as an educator since 1991. Tell me, how have you seen this phenomenon of sort of anti-Israel Jewish groups changing over the last 28 years?
So, I'm a graduate of Tenenbaum Chat in 1991, but then I taught at supplementary school and while I was in the Faculty of Education, and then I taught at Associated, and then at Chat, back home to where I graduated. And I've been at Chat for 18 years now, and I'm a Jewish history teacher. So what I've noticed throughout the years is that more and more of our students, more and more educators have joined this narrative, have joined this PC, politically correct mindset that we have to be balanced, that we have to appease everyone. And what I have really noticed is that for the sake of being politically correct, I abandoned my Judaism. I abandoned Israel because it's politically correct. Because if I show pride in who I am and my roots and my origins, if I show pride, that means I'm not politically correct. That may imply that I'm better than you. So therefore, I try to hide it. I try to downplay it because pride now equals better. That wasn't the case when I went to Chat. That wasn't the case up until, I would say, 10 years ago even. Nowadays, things are different. If you're proud of who you are, and this is where I find exactly the issue with students. If I am proud of who I am, that means I'm putting the other down. And I was shocked after the Passover break, coming to class, teaching 2 grade 12 classes, Holocaust and film. Only for some students who I've never had before, because most of the students I had at TCK, I had their brothers, sisters, so they know me. These are students that I had them for the first time this year. I come into class and I talk about, we are living what I am teaching you. We are living it. We are living the signs of anti-Semitism, of modern anti-Semitism. Here we go again in a different disguise. And look what happened in San Diego. And let's look at the New York Times cartoon, only for a hand to be put up and say, Mrs. Polonsky, I don't see what's anti-Semitic about it. Or I don't see what's wrong with Ilan Omar saying about anything about the Benjamins. And I stopped class and I said, hold on. And I had to reteach the grade 11 course in 10 minutes. And I had to talk about Clermont and Lafare in France and dual loyalty. And I had to remind them. And so what happens is, and I'll end in a second, what happens here is this, that because the students of today think it's not politically correct to be proud of who I am, and therefore they distance themselves from knowledge. They don't want to know, and so they're missing critical mass of knowledge that they need. And what happens is they try to be so politically correct, they try to belong to groups, to other people's causes, only to remember one day for somebody, and this is what I say, and my family's here, and I've said it at the dinner table, and you know who told me this amazing statement, then when we forget who we are, and you immerse yourself in everybody else's causes and somebody else's history, don't you worry. Somebody else will remind you who you are. Somebody will remind you. Just like the Jews in 1935 when the Nuremberg laws came and they heard it on the radio, there were people who woke up and oops, all of a sudden they were Jewish. They went to church the other day, but now they were Jewish because according to the Nuremberg laws, they were Jews. And so when you forget who you are, somebody else along the way will remind you. One famous film that illustrates that is Sunshine, about the Austrian-Hungarian family. They convert, and then they become communists, and they become more German than Germans, and whatever. Only for somebody at some point to say, call them names, which I won't use right now. So that's okay. When you forget, the other defines us and reminds us. And so to me, really important to connect our students with knowledge, empower them, and I lead by example. So every day I come to class, and they're like, Mrs. Polonsky, oops, we saw you here, we saw you there. Yes, because yes, people don't change the world. Yes, people don't change the world. You got to cross the line from thinking to doing, and I lead by example, and that's how I hope to make a change.
Thank you. The next question is for Dr. Muskat. Aviva, you talked a little bit about political correctness. Sorry to block you, Rabbi, just for a second. You talked a little bit about political correctness. Jack, as a professor in academia, tell me, do you think, not trying to be a leading question, but do you think that the desire to be politically correct and to fit in has impacted young Jews, and if so, how?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. And 2.5 minutes is very aspirational. So the whole topic is complicated. You know, the weather's complex. The Rubik's Cube is complicated, and I want to thank Rabbi Blech for your comments, because we're living in very strange times. We're living in a time when there is such a desire, and I'll just speak in my role as chair of Hasbara Fellowships. I want to make a couple of positive comments. We do have Jewish leadership. We are building a new leadership, and we see the kids here today. But if you're not into Judaism, if I'm not that into you, and if you don't understand it, you don't understand what it means, you just want to belong. And belonging and being part of a group is incredibly powerful. And just to give you an idea of what it's like to go on campus today, and not just among faculty, I'm challenged. One of the roles that I want to do is I want to find faculty on campus who are themselves feeling browbeaten by the leftist agenda, by the mural at York that we all know and talk about, but it's still there. But imagine if it was, blackface, or if it was another mural that you didn't like, how long it would stay up. I'm not trying to tout anything, but I'd written something for CJN online a little while ago about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. When is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? And the Ilhan Omar comments and the fact that we're now mainstreaming anti-Semitism in a terrible way. So the shooting in San Diego is not about killing Jews, it's about gun control. We need better gun control. And the problem on campus now is when professors are afraid to speak up, then students are going to be afraid to speak up. If a professor has power and is anti-Israel in a math class, the math professor is going to talk about how Israel is the world's greatest demon, The problem is kids want to belong, and the problem that we're having is when a student goes on campus, an 18-year-old, and they're confronted right away with what I'll call intersectionality. How many of you know what intersectionality is, just by show of hands? Okay, a number of you. Well, the rest of you should have a look. 3 years ago, nobody's hand would go up. I'd have to look at it. Intersectionality is that theory which says that all grievances, all victims have something in common, and that it actually was founded by a professor in 1979, a law professor, who said that when you look at discrimination suits against women or against people of color, they're very separate. So you have sexism, and you've got racism, and you've got homophobia, and you've got Islamophobia, and you have other different groups, and they all have something in common. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the intersectionality of these groups and create a hierarchy of victims. And we've seen this in the problem in Toronto with the Gay Pride Parade, where certain groups are more important than others. Police can't join now, and Black Lives Matter, which is a group that says that you cannot have racism, it can only happen in one direction. And the point I want to make is that the only group that is not allowed to join this intersectionality group are the Jews. Because ironically, Rabbi Blech, again, our success is thrown against us. Because we're successful, and ironically, again, many of the deans of the colleges in the US where the BDS movement reigns supreme, as well as in Toronto, are Jews. So you have Jewish faculty, Jewish administrators, Jewish leaders. My favorite joke is the Bereshit spacecraft that just about landed. You know, it didn't quite make it, sorry, but it got pretty close. I think the comments came out on the internet that it's another attempt of Israel to occupy the moon. And so when you see things through that perspective, it's very, very difficult to go on campus and feel any pride as a Jew, because you want to belong. And when you want to belong to groups. And where Tikkun Olam has become all about climate change and all about non-Jewish things in the environment and the oppression of other groups, then you get caught up in that rhetoric, and it becomes very, very difficult to feel any kind of Jewish pride. And I'm going to put the blame on the parents and on the educators. You ask, where are the students, where are the millennials, Rabbi Blech? I say, where are the teachers? To teach us to have pride in who we are and what we are. And if we have pride in that, we will go forward. And it's appalling, the lack of understanding we have in our own history. But it's a war worth fighting, and we're fighting it, and I actually think we're winning. I just want to make one more comment, because it's not a simple question. In 1948, 6% of Jews lived in Israel. What percentage live in Israel now, do you figure? Almost 50%, 45 to 50%. The diaspora is done. Okay. Israel is the 7th happiest nation in the world. Israel is creating amazing things, and we know it. And unless we understand that what's happening in the shifts, the conservative movement has just had to close and lay off people in their own denomination, and nothing lasts forever. And I'm not saying, I mean, Europe is definitely finished, France is finished. We have a chance here, but with what? The opportunity is that we have to bring education back. And I'm too old to have gone to chat, but I'm pre-chat. But there was a time, and I will finish with this, we could be on different sides of the spectrum politically. There was a time 10 years ago even, when we may disagree on solutions, on causes and reasons, but we had Anti-Israel. We all knew that at the end of the day, we go have a beer, and we still love Israel, but we don't want to be a Jewish state that's oppressing people. What does it mean to be Jewish? To be a dictatorship? No, we want a Jewish democratic state. We've been pushing too much on the democratic side. We have to move more on the Jewish side, and we're not going to stop being a moral nation, because you cannot have a people who are fighting without a sense of morality in what they're doing. But the problem we're having in North America is, ironically, and I will call the Pittsburgh massacre the Kristallnacht, and I said that at the time, and look what's happened since, that the good days are over, and we're in a different time. And I know that Aviva Polonsky agrees with me, and maybe Rabbi Seth as well, but I think that the challenges we have are, it's new again and it's old again, and we are going to, and we're stronger because we do have Israel, but we have to fight, and we have to be honest with each other. And as Rabbi Blech keeps pointing out, take the reasons away and look at what the causes are. Anyway, thank you.
Rabbi Grauer, you're the head of school for a large modern Orthodox day school, high school, that obviously within the modern Orthodox stream, Zionism, religious Zionism is very much front and center. So, but how do you, in your role, certainly overseeing educators, how do you fight lethargy and disinterest that might come with having a state of Israel that sort of becomes second nature, where students don't necessarily appreciate it, where your students, even within the Orthodox day school system, could become susceptible to hearing some anti-Israel propaganda. So what have you seen, and how have you sort of managed that issue within your experience?
Thank you. And once again, thank you, Rabbi Blech, for a beautiful presentation, and Hasbara Fellowship for running with Aish, an incredible program. Thank you all for being here. Hard question to answer again in 2 minutes. I would say that I take a little bit, perhaps more of an optimistic view on things in general, sort of picking up from the last comments that were made. And I was also at APAC, perhaps in a bit more of a quieter fashion, but I was incredibly blown away and inspired by the 18,000 people that were there. I walked away on fire. I walked away feeling like, this is incredible. Look at what's going on. Look at what we've accomplished. Look at what we have in front of us. And I think that's how we try to inspire kids today. And you're right, many of them are disengaged, and many of them could care less. And many of them are jaded, and they take Israel for granted. But you look at the startup world that's continued. You look at the apps. You look at Israel's performance in the world of technology and startup companies and on the NASDAQ and all the different successes that we're seeing in technology and the military. Those are the ways in which we try to inspire kids, and we try to create passion among them by demonstrating and creating and showing Jewish pride. There's always what to be concerned about, and there's a lot of negativity out there, and there's a lot of pessimism, and there's a very, very easy sort of way to, in effect, take a very pessimistic view on the world. But if you look at the positives that are coming out, and you look at what's happening around us, and you look at, as you said, the almost 50% of Jews that are currently living in Israel, and the fact that travel has become so much easier, and people can go so often, and Hasbara Fellowships and what they do by bringing people, young people to Israel, and look at the growth of birthright, and the thousands upon thousands upon thousands who go to Israel, travel there, the political figures, the congressmen, and even in Canada, members of parliament who go to Israel. Those are the ways in which you continue to build passion among youth and demonstrate and show them why it's important for them to care, why they need to be active, why they need to be educated, and why they need to stand up for what they believe in on behalf of the State of Israel.
Thank you, and thank you, Robert, for giving me this opportunity, because it just gave me another thought that I didn't have. We're sitting here saying, and Rabbi Blech is saying, how can it be so crazy? How can people not understand how hard we're trying, how hard we're doing things? How can we have Jewish kids against Israel, worrying about the occupation? And I think that we're missing one little thing. I think that we want the Palestinians to have a good life. We have to have empathy. And I think if we just think for a minute, what is it like to wake up every day as a Palestinian and not see that you've just landed on the moon, and not see that you're a startup nation, and not see that you're doing well, and that you have a corrupt leadership, and that you're not able to educate your children the way you want to, and that you have to leave the place you're living in? I think we have to understand that we can acknowledge, we have to say, yes, there's some problems. We're still at war. Considering that Israel is at war with many of the nations, we only have a cold peace with Jordan and Egypt. We shouldn't forget that there is a validity. You ask about the millennials and what to do with the idealism. The worst thing to do is to deny that there's a problem. And I think there's some validity to some of the criticism of Israel, some of the criticism of the way in which we sometimes say, the Hamas charter is they want us dead, or there is no Palestinian people, it was made up by the KGB. Yes, that could all be true, or Jesus was a Palestinian, and it makes no sense. But it's contempt, and we can't show contempt, because we've won. Now, we haven't been allowed to win, really win, but in a way we've won. And I think that when you go to Israel and when you see, I can't tell, we talk about Jewish white privilege. I can't tell a Palestinian from an Israeli half the time. I look at half of Israel, it's all Mizrahi, and I feel like, who am I? What am I doing? I really feel like, the guy who doesn't fit in. The whole country is Levantine in many ways, in what I'm saying. It's a Middle Eastern country. When Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, everyone said the Arabs were going to go crazy. There was not one peep. When Israel decided it needed to put in metal detectors at the Temple Mount because there were disturbances, all of East Jerusalem went mad, even though Mecca has metal detectors. It's a different society. We don't understand it all. But we can't just say, look how good we are. I'm tired of hearing how many Palestinians we treat in the hospitals. It's enough. It's like my older brother. I know he's smarter than me. I know he's better than me. I know he doesn't have to study. Do you have to rub it in my face every day? So I think we need to think about that a little bit too.
Thank you. Rabbi Blech, question for you. There's an adage that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So when we're talking about impacting, young, vulnerable Jews, when I say vulnerable to anti-Israel propaganda and so on, how would you, in your experience, certainly as a rabbi, would counsel people to not just play to people's intellects, but play to people's young people's emotions? That this isn't just force-feeding pro-Israel information down their head, but how do you really inspire people to sort of hop it?
I tried to explain there's no way that if this is presented in terms of an argument that anyone can win. This has been thrashed out so long, so often, and it's become cliche after cliche. Everybody knows, as you correctly said, and I hope I conveyed that, there is a side to the Arabs, yes, a side to us. The big question that I wanted to emphasize, interestingly enough, is that a Canadian newspaper journalist who knew that I was going to be speaking tonight was given my phone number and called me in the middle of the week. And he said, I'd just like to ask you several things. He wanted to know the theme of what I'd be talking about. And then the big problem that concerns him is, I do not understand, why is it that so many Jewish people are in BDS? So many Jews are in the forefront of the Palestinian struggle. And that's a fascinating question. The reason Jews are involved is because of our morality and because we see the other side. And the problem is, Lionel Trilling said, some people are so open-minded, they let their brains fall out. Now, I believe in being open-minded, and I hope that I made the case as well for understanding what they're saying, but I chose to take more the point that you were making, the fact that we are losing our self-pride. What I think you didn't mention is that there's a remarkable dichotomy, a contradiction, in effect, that's going on the campuses. Here, on the one hand, is what you beautifully pointed out. You can't be proud of anything because that's lording it over someone. On the other hand, there's cultural approbation. You have to respect what my culture gives me, and if you try to use it, if you try to use a Chinese recipe, you are insulting me because you're stealing my Chinese recipe. So if you're going to use kishke gefilte fish, you are insulting me. I don't understand. My mother would say it's the biggest honor. They want my recipe. I don't understand cultural approbation. But all that has to do with pride. And on the one hand, you say you're opposed to pride, and on the other hand, you say every culture should have pride. On the one hand, you say you're opposed to racism. Today, the biggest word, the biggest negative is racism. I mean, a TV star who had the most popular program in the United States, Roseanne Barr, lost her job and no longer can get work because she said something that was racist. And what about all the people who spout anti-Semitism? I don't understand. That's not racism? In what way do you distinguish between racism and anti-Semitism? And Hitler proved that it is racism. That doesn't make sense to me. How do you understand liberals who, in my days, said freedom of speech is the most important thing? So now when Israeli generals or politicians go to speak in Berkeley or someplace else, you can't hear them because all the Palestinian people go, supporters, young men and women, and they scream and they make sure that he can't be heard. What is that all about? I thought freedom of speech was a value. I thought if you're in the women's movement that you care about women's rights. I thought that was the reason for the women's movement. And then people in the leadership of the women's movement, Sarsa, they are pro-Palestinian, where women have... I needn't tell you, where in Saudi Arabia they still can't drive, where they are oppressed. I don't understand. I don't understand how the LGBT movement, homosexuals are pro-Palestinian, when if you're gay in those areas, they throw you off a roof. I don't understand. So how can you be pro something? I know you want to say something, and I'm not suggesting that all of them are, but I'm really indicating, to my mind, the impossibility for me to comprehend holding on to two values at the same time and being pro something when what they represent, they would kill you, and they tell you that. I keep making that point. I know that I have to be understanding. And the last point that I would like to make, even though I had a heck of a long time, and I'm sorry, when I told someone who I respect very much, a very, very, very prominent scholar, I said, I'm going to be speaking about this. Is there anything you would suggest that I make sure that I hit? And I'll tell you, I was going to hit it, but it was for the end, and I saw my time ran out, so this is the extra opportunity. And he said to me, well, you really, the point that you should make is, if you ask anybody in the real world, where's the most exciting place in America? Silicon Valley. Ask anybody in Silicon Valley who is most involved and has the greatest achievements in terms of solving the world's water problems, solving the world's technological problems, solving the world's medical problems, cancer, anything and everything. Everything is in Israel. So what you should be doing is asking the young people. I hear all about the political considerations. We can't solve that. We said, okay, everybody's going to have some point. Tell me, are you are you for medical advancement? Are you pro technological achievement? Are you pro? Speak of all the things that Israel is a standout in the world. Where would the world be without Israel? And speak about secular things, not just the spiritual, and talk to them their language. And if they say, yeah, but Israel should go down the drain, really, oh, that's what you want. Okay.
The next question, thank you, Rabbi Blech. The next question is for Aviva. Aviva, you know, within especially young people, we certainly see, and within the Jewish people in general, we see a diversity of opinions. In fact, diversity of opinions is very much the hallmark of our people, and certainly the rabbis and everybody here would know that you walk into any place of Jewish learning, yeshiva, beis midrash, you'll see arguing and disputes. There's certainly not a one-size-fits-all. So Aviva, within your realm as a Jewish educator for so long, where do you draw the line between sort of legitimate criticism of Israel? In other words, you have a student who says, Mrs. Polonsky, you know, I heard that Israel does this. What about this? I heard that Israel does this. Is that true? Versus a provocateur, somebody who has a bone to pick. A, how do you draw the line? And B, how do you deal with them differently?
Question is if I will be PC right now or not. But
there's no cameras. It's okay.
Oh. So to be frank, because usually I am, I make a distinction between what goes on in my class maybe and outside my class. I make the boundaries in my class. So basically in my classroom, we're Zionistic. Bottom line, Israel has a right to exist like any other nation under the sun. The problem I see, and I'm going to call it as it is, because hopefully what I say may evoke some change, I am hoping, is when schools don't make it clear where the boundaries are. That's when the discussion goes to places that I'm not sure it should be going. So if our premise is that Israel has a right to exist, and we all agree, we can debate about boundaries, we can debate about rights, and we can talk about it being in area A and B and C, and ways to achieve peace, because we all ultimately want to have peace. The way to peace is where we disagree on. Some think this way, some think that way, but there's a line in my classroom. And I thought there was a line in our community. And I thought there was a line in the school and in other schools. Apparently I was wrong. So when the leadership doesn't take a stand like I do, and it's clear, crystal clear, we are pro-Israel. We believe that Israel has a right to exist. And say it loud and clear and with pride, that's when issues begin. Because if the leadership doesn't really know what we stand for, how would the teachers know? Or the students? And that's when the opening, there's a crack that never used to be when I was at my school or in other schools. But now there's a crack, and you know what happens when there's a crack? It comes bigger and bigger. And I'm going to say something that's even more, not politically correct, because I'm doing it for the sake of Jewish continuity, because I truly believe in what I say, and every single day in class I tell them, if you forget what I say, at least you're going to remember and be inspired to make a difference. Is that we have to be proud of who we are. We have to know what we stand for. We can't be in between the worlds. Take a stand and stand with your head high. And when the leadership doesn't do it, that's what happens. It's a ripple effect. And so in a way, I'm putting the finger at leadership, because the captain leads, right, is the captain of the ship. I blame some educators who, well, again, it brings back to the leadership that doesn't maybe correct these educators, what we stand for. So we need more educators that are passionate and stand for something and are not afraid, and leaders that are not afraid to stand up to Israel, and then we'll see a difference. You have to stand up and be brave, right? Yeah. Thank you.
This next question is for Jack, Dr. Muskat. Jack, you gave in your earlier, you look surprised. You're on a panel. Okay, fine. Yeah, okay, it's all right. So you gave a powerful sort of j'accuse to academics and to parents and to teachers. We sit here, we could talk about the millennials and young people and students, but like you said, I mean, at some point, everything we learn comes from parents or teachers, etc. In the academic world, which is the question I want to ask, in the academic world, what are the phenomena that you're seeing among professors? In other words, to what degree are, in your experience, professors using and abusing their authority to defame Israel? Because certainly within Hasbara, we can see that that's a major issue. In your experience, how do you see that, and how do you? And I know we've talked about this a little bit. How do you combat that in your role?
First of all, I just want to clarify something. It's unfortunate that we're being taped, because I'm only an adjunct prof, and so I've only taught a couple of courses. But I have to tell you, you don't need to get my opinion on what's going on campus. We can see where all of the nonsense is coming from. Many of the BDS motions that are passed at universities are passed with signatures. 34 professors at NYU signed a BDS motion. NYU itself just passed a BDS motion against its sister campus in Israel to not have academic connections with its own school. And you know, Rabbi Blech and I are going to go, you want to hear this one, you're not going to believe the next one, and you're not going to believe the next one. We have, it's a bigger question. The question is, so as Rabbi Blech asked, and it's not even about university professors, it's about the left. It's how, and unfortunately, Jews tend to be very prominent in the left, because when we gave the world a conscience, and when we gave the world the idea of loving the stranger, was you can love the stranger and help him, but you don't have to bring him into your family to kill you. So human rights was founded by Jews. Amnesty International was founded by Jews. So much, the UN, so much of the great things that we've created morally and has been created by Jews. And I'll get to why these different groups, the feminists and the gays, are all supporting the Islamist cause, the Red-Green Alliance. But I want to quote one of our twins, our 9-year-old grandson, Louis, who said, the reason is they hate us.
He's right.
They hate us. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about what have you done lately. They hate us. Now, the reason they're all united is because they hate Israel. Just as I said, when the Arabs rioted because their Jews may be going on the Temple Mount, Professor Mordechai Kedar, who's going to be speaking here in a couple of weeks, whom some of you may have already seen and you should go visit, he has a deep theological understanding of what it's a religious war in the Arab world, that there should not be a Jewish state. In the same way, for the leftists, for the globalists, for the internationalists, to have, after the Second World War, where the worst nationalism, the German Nazism, had to end, and we have to have a post-national state. What do we have? A little tiny country with minority rights called Israel, that's particularistic, that's nationalistic, that's religious, that's doing everything to make you feel upset, is surviving and thriving and is successful, and it's a black eye to the left, particularly the secular left. I want to make one quick comment. I was in Israel last summer. On August 2nd in 2018, there was a law passed. I'll tell you what it was because I was there, the nation-state law. It was a very controversial law. It said that in Israel is a Jewish state. It's a Jewish nation with Jewish holidays. And there was a huge protest in the United States, and one of the protests were, what do you need a nation-state law? We already know it. Okay, if you don't need it, we wrote it down. Now we're upset. One of the first protesters, and this is something that I want to ask you, Rabbi Blech, for one of your, not co-religious, but one of your colleagues, Rabbi Rick Jacobs of the Reform Movement of America, came out against it and called it a racist law. The head of the Reform Movement, a rabbi, calls it a racist law. So, as Aviva was telling us, if the leadership, of our own leadership, both in our rabbinical, pastoral, educational, is so unable to differentiate what it means to be a proud Jew, what it means. We're only 70 years a state. Okay, we made a couple mistakes here and there. If they don't understand what it means, and not to have that, and to shoot us in the foot, and as you say, the crack just keeps widening, it just keeps going on and on and on. So it's not just the academic thing, but it's a broader question, because everybody wants to be seen as part of the PC crowd. Everybody wants to be seen as even and balanced and not to be thought of as a racist. And by the way, Bachar Banu means Bachar Banu, and we were chosen. You know, and it's a lot of work. Anyway.
Thank you. And we're just going to be wrapping up in the next 5 minutes. So I just want to end just finally with Rabbi Grauer, and then we'll wrap up 5 minutes. Rabbi Grauer, really just in general, parting words. I mean, you sort of have a foot in all the worlds here. You're a rabbi, you're an educator, tell me, just parting, I mean, what can people do and sort of on one foot in 2 minutes or less?
Well, parting words. I mean, there's so much to share. I'll share just two thoughts, listening really to the panel and thinking about all the sides. When you look at high school students, and really even I extend this into university students, I think we all agree that there is a crisis of education in the context of what people know and what people don't know. And I think we all look at students, and perhaps young adults, and perhaps many of us, and say that, you know, the internet is incredible, and there's an incredible amount of education out there. And in fact, even just short videos that are done, you know, many of you have seen the stuff that Danny Danone has done, and Rabbi Sachs is now doing many videos, and many, many others are doing these short 5-minute, 6-minute videos explaining the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and explaining lots of different concepts and BDS and anti-BDS and all the different ideas. And it's all wonderful, and it's all very, very important in the context of educating youth, emerging adults, adolescents, you know, people in university. All of it's absolutely necessary, and I've actually been saying for a very long time, and we do more of this, that we need to do more high school education in this regard, and we need to spend more time in high school educating towards these nuances and towards these differences. But I just will say, vis-a-vis this discussion in particular, that I'm not sure that we do ourselves a service when we only focus on one side. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that, and disagreeing with everyone here, to say that one side is that both sides have validity and that both sides are equal, but I think we need to educate our youth about the other sides and about what people claim and about what people say, a dam mashatashiv of sorts, so that people know how to answer, people know how to respond. And I think all too often we like to use platitudes and one-liners and sort of, throw our weight behind generalities and stereotypes, saying sentences, saying comments, and I'm not chas v'chalila being critical of anything anyone said here. Everyone was very, very wonderful and everything that everyone said, but it loses nuance and sophistication in the context of understanding a whole picture to be able to help people to really have a full understanding. So my parting words are really that I think we have to be careful when explaining all these complex issues, that they can't be done in 2 minutes, they can't be done in sound bites, but that you really need to look through the history, you really need to study the ideas, you really need to give a total picture so that then when our youth are older and they're actually on a college campus and they are confronted by issues, they know how to respond, and they know how to respond intellectually and with intelligence and with erudition, with a sense of confidence and with a sense of, yes, I hear what you're saying about this, but X, Y, and Z, etc. And yes, vis-a-vis one of the other points that were made is there absolutely is a red line when it comes to, do we have a right to exist, and do we have a right to our country, political Zionism, religious Zionism, and that is a line that we need to hold in the sand, because there are too many people who just want to deny our right and Israel's right to a country and Israel's right to exist. And as soon as that conversation starts along those lines, then we know there's no one to talk to anymore, because of the fact that they're not even speaking on the same plane. But once you get past that, then there's a world of education that we need to give our students and anyone else as a way to help them and to arm them with the tools to truly be effective. So I guess just a parting comment, and really this speaks towards what Hasbara and what courses at Chad and at so many other schools are focusing on, is that they're incredibly valuable, incredibly worthwhile, and we need to encourage more and more to become educated around these issues so that they really can attack the issues and give fully knowledgeable and really well thought out responses. But thank you all for being here this evening.